Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel, and I'm an event facilitator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Aninawak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're gathered here this afternoon to celebrate the launch of the 2025 edition of the Prairie Garden, dedicated to budget-minded gardening. It's always a pleasure to partner with the Prairie Garden Committee to showcase their latest publication. To give you a sense of how the afternoon will flow, there will be a brief history of the Prairie Garden, presented by Tim Evans, followed by an introduction of the latest edition by editor Evelyn Lundeen. Presentations from Dorothy Dobbie, Stu Innes, and Debbie Innes will then follow, and if time permits, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. And if we do end up proceeding with the questions, and you're one of those folks here who does have a question, please raise your hand nice and high for me to see you, and I'll come by with this microphone just so you can be heard by everybody here and to those watching on the live stream. And I will be back at the close of the event to review purchasing procedure. But for now, please join me in welcoming the chair of the Prairie Garden Committee, Tim Evans.
Okay, oh good, you can hear me. Okay, this is wonderful. This is our first gathering since COVID. Give yourselves a hand if you're all still alive and here. Yay! Okay, brief history. There will be a quiz in an hour. The Winnipeg Horticultural Society published the first book called The Winnipeg Flower Garden in 1937. Anybody around at that time? No? Okay. Officially, it was an annual report for the society, but it also contained local horticulturalist articles. 1955, the name was changed to The Flower Garden due to increased readership. And just an FYI, no book was printed during the war years of 1940, 1943, 1944. That shows how war is hell even when it comes to gardening book publishing. 1957, 2 years later, the flower garden became too damn popular and extended right across the prairies and expanded beyond gardening in Winnipeg. The name became the Prairie Garden, but still under the care of the Winnipeg Horticultural Society. In the year 2000, the Winnipeg Horticultural Society ended. The book continued to publish nonetheless under the Prairie Garden Committee. And now that I have built you up to a frenzied anticipation, you can go to the prairiegarden.ca to read further on the history. For your information, I don't know how many of you would be aware of this. We have all the past editions from 1937 to 1980 available for free and for your reading pleasure at the Manitoba Historical Society Archives at mhs.mb.ca. You can find the link on the prairiegarden.ca book. The full editions are all there, right from 1937. A quick mention, we have, once you've read the book or received the book, you can go to our main page website. We have a reader feedback survey and a lucky draw. The draw is you get 3 free books from the past of your choosing. Oh, and also sign up on the main page of our website for our newsletter. We've got Mira here who does a phenomenal newsletter and sends it out monthly. As well, a bit of information about the Prairie Garden book. Do you know that we are published, or we send out to people right from Vancouver to Newfoundland, and also to North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. We have board members here. I'd like to introduce our wonderful board. We've got, in no particular order, we've got Tracy Miller, our treasurer. We've got Brent Poole, our secretary. Evelyn Lundeen, who will be also speaking next. Rita Campbell, marketing and sales. There's Rita. And Bill Dowie is here. I saw him. Oh, there he is over there. Okay. I don't think we have Indy Mitra, who is our social media. We've got Mira Sinha, who does our Prairie Garden newsletter. And our new addition, Karen Strobel, who will be our editorial assistant over there. And we've got Joel Simpson. Where's Joel? Way at the far back there with a title we have yet to determine. Not present is Joe Zhu, Z-H-U, who does our incredible website. And we also don't have Dawn Kinsler, who is our North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota contact person. We would like to also thank our sponsors. We've got Oban Nurseries, Jeffries Nurseries, Lindenberg Seeds Limited, St. Mary's Nursery, TNT Seeds, treetime.ca, Vandermeer Garden Center, Ann Jensen's, and the Lily Nook, Prairie Originals, Sage Garden, Shelmerdines, and that is it. We have, we also have distribution throughout the Prairie provinces. We also have a couple, our books are available in the US at All Seasons Garden Center in Grand Forks, Minnesota Landscape Arboretum Gift and Garden Center in Morris, Minnesota, and Morning Sky Greenery in Chaska, Minnesota, and we have one European representative, Lian's Siergrassen in DeWilp, Minnesota. And finally, there is, I've been asked, if you are a collector or aficionado of the Prairie Garden book, I've got some copies so that you could tick off which ones you want and order them if you like. So I'm going to leave these over somewhere. I'm going to leave them over here. And now our wonderful editor, Evelyn Lundeen.
Hello, good afternoon. Okay, as Tim has said, I'm the editor of the Prairie Garden, and my name is Evelyn Lundeen. Okay, is that better now? Okay, anyway, I am Evelyn Lundeen. I am the editor of the Prairie Garden, and this is my third year in helping to publish our book. I want to thank John Taves, who is one of these facilitators, along with Daniel, who is our facilitator for this afternoon. As well as the Dolly Robinsons for helping us launch what is the 86th edition of the Prairie Garden. So that just gives you an idea as to how long we've been around. I also need to thank the other two members of my working team. Okay, first of all is our wonderful graphic artist, John Toyne, who could not be with us this afternoon, but his calm and efficient manner helped to keep my anxiety level at a workable pace. So we didn't have too many problems that we had problems overcoming. And the other person that I really want to thank is my editorial assistant, Lisa Guy, who also unfortunately is no longer part of our committee, but she was a phenomenal help to me in the couple of years that she was with our committee. As Tim has already mentioned, our theme for this year is budget themed gardening. And there are 54 articles that we have in the book for you to read and enjoy this year. There's a lot that gardeners can do at home to help make gardening a little bit less expensive than it is nowadays. It's very hard to keep a garden in the face of the increasing financial obligations in running a household. And I have to say for myself that I just could not imagine life without a garden. That would not be life as far as I'm concerned if I could not garden. In addition to having our 27 articles on our theme, we also have a number of other articles that talk about a whole varied number of horticultural subjects. Our authorship, okay, Tim talked a little bit about the readership now, and we mentioned the authorship goes across Canada. We have Donna Balser from Calgary, and she's writing about lemons on the prairies in this book. Myra Frock from Lumsden, Saskatchewan. She will be telling you about her beautiful peony gardens just outside the city. And Lumsden is a little bit outside of Regina, not too far for those of you that are not familiar with Lumsden. If we want to move to the east, Doug Markham talks about his obsession with meadow room. And we also have a number of individuals who are writing us from the States. And in this book, we have Gabe Brown, and he is from Bismarck, North Dakota, and he will be writing about soil health. Okay. Now I'm going to move back to Winnipeg, and I'm going to introduce our esteemed guest editor for the afternoon, Dorothy Dobbie, and she will be talking about how to keep a beautiful garden on a budget. Thank you.
First of all, I have to figure out how to use this little machine here. A clicker, oh my goodness. Can't find my glasses. I've got pockets. Is anybody here, you know, one of those people who says no pockets, no purchase? I think women should all say that, don't you? Just delighted to be here today. I think I can see where we are. Yes, I do. And so glad to be invited and very honored to be invited to help out with the Prairie Garden once again. I was here 3 years ago now, I think, as the editor, and that was a great honor as well. I'm going to tell you a little bit today about what it was like when I started my garden. And you might not know the whole story, but when we bought our current home in Charleswood, it was back in 1991-92. It certainly wasn't for the landscaping, let me tell you. There was nothing there but a broad expanse of lawn in front. There was a great big boulevard tree, a poplar tree, and the house had these young cedars framing it. And then the lot, which was 150 feet in the front, narrowed to 17 feet, and it backed on a passive park. There was a big pool that dominated the yard, and it was surrounded by this ugly brown fencing. And there were a couple of black knot-ridden trees, choke cherries, and a wide strip, a foot-wide strip of something that was supposed to be, I guess, a border garden. So there wasn't really anything much to recommend the yard. So here it is today, and this is where it says slide 2, and I hope I'm going to push the right slide. I got it. And it's a little overgrown, but every inch is loved by its keeper, and that keeper is just me, nobody else. So the first years in the garden didn't see very much action. I was still in Parliament, and you know what, that job doesn't leave a lot of time for anything else. But as luck would have it, I was freed a couple of years later, a little abruptly, as all but 2 of our governing members were defeated, and suddenly, well, I had nothing but time on my hands. I also had no money, because 5 years service and one time being elected does not give you entry into the MP's pension plan. And worse, the healthy company that I had left behind was done, pillaged by its keepers, who I thought I could trust. My husband had left his job to save it, but it was already too late, and now he too was unemployed. So as I contemplated the future, wondering what we were going to do next, my husband Glenn began to haul wheelbarrows full of rich black topsoil to cover the spindly grass that was trying to grow under the choke cherries between the pool and the gateway to the park. And I could see this happening as I stood at the kitchen sink wondering, what next? And gradually a picture began to take shape in my mind. I saw a path through a flower-filled garden and under an arbor leading to the gate. So slowly I was lured outside, and I started hand-pulling the weeds that were taking advantage of the new soil. And as I did, the turmoil in my mind began to subside. I made friends with the worms, something that I always had hated, and the other creatures that lived in the dark. And I began looking for things to plant that wouldn't break our meager budget. Well, you know how that goes. Your gardening friends are more than anxious to share their plants. Oxeye daisies, iris, valerian, false sunflowers, yarrow, goutweed, bellflower, all the plants that never really leave you. They're so faithful that I still have many of these, and many more of these little toughies that innocent gardeners are grateful for at the beginning. I also planted annuals from seed, all good things, calendula, they will stick with you forever, by the way, as well. Cosmos, bachelor buttons, asters, zinnias, and some folks were kind enough to share peonies and give me divisions, and I bought back this really interesting plant, soapwort, from my daughter's Ontario garden as my perennial gardens began to grow. I don't know if any of you have ever grown soapwort. It's very prolific, but it's a great plant. And when it's in bloom, it's beautiful. So as these were taking hold, and many of them took very, very good hold, I was learning more and more about gardening. And we were looking at thrifty ways to create, planters to put around the edges of the fall green pool. We found 2 giant wooden half barrels, which are still, believe it or not, in commission, although I suspect their bottoms have long ago rotted out. And to give one of them, you'll see it, the one on the far right, a focal point, and to provide something for the sweet peas to climb, I stapled a few wooden slats together in the shape of a fan. This is 30 years ago, and it's still there. And that inspired Glenn to use a bit of scrap lumber to make window boxes that I think are in that picture. Are they in that picture? Next one, I guess, for the kitchen and the garage. He painted them pink, which is the same color as the house. When we went to buy that house and I saw a pink house, I said, no, I'm not buying a pink house. But the minute I walked in the door, I knew it was ours. And so anyway, pink it still is. And some 25 years later, these window boxes are still as sturdy as ever. And of course, we used all the repurposed pots from nurseries, and we haunted yard sales for bargain finds. And late fall is a really good place right now, as a matter of fact, to pick up these kinds of bargains at local garden centers and even at box stores, because it's often better for them to sell the products off at cap cost than to store them at full, and try to figure out what to do with them in the spring when all the new stuff comes in. So go out now and take a look. Now, by now, I had started the Manitoba Gardener magazine, which was the forerunner of today's Canada's Local Gardener. And I was learning a lot about gardening. And I wasn't alone, believe it or not. This is 30 years ago. It seems like we've been gardening forever, but even Shelmerdine was still a tiny store then on Roblin. And they were just introducing such exotics as hosta. And that was the plain one. Daylilies, everyone was just discovering them, including that evil orange one, which continues to overrun the dark space between my neighbor and me. But I made some great acquisitions too. And a friend at the lake tore up some strands of Engelmann ivy, which is still around the fences, covers the fences around the yard. And then during a visit to Ottawa, staying at a friend's condominium I admired, and in garden thief-like stealth, I tore off a few strands of Boston ivy, which isn't particularly hardy here. I tucked it away in my briefcase, and it was forgotten for another week while I visited my daughter Shauna and her grandkids in Toronto. And it was pretty limp and sad when I discovered the cuttings when I came home. But I planted them anyway, and they not only survived, they thrived. And you can see how wonderfully they have covered and add to the green haven of my backyard. Am I on the right slide? Yes, I am. Make sure I'm okay here. Now, one of the plants that I continued to cherish was the tree peony that I bought from the long gone RBM Gardens. Anybody remember RBM Gardens? Belle McGuckin was the ardent businesswoman who with her father ran the place, but her knowledge about plants wasn't particularly, extensive. Still, she had a poster hanging on the edge of her garage, or the edge of her store, outside the turkey sheds that housed the plants. And it had a picture of a tree peony showing these beautiful red silky flowers. I just had to have one, but it was this princely sum of $13, but I spent it, I bought it. And she gave me a slip of paper that came with the roots that showed how to plant and care for this beauty, and I followed those instructions completely because I was still learning. Planted on the north side about 6 feet in front of an evergreen, it instructed. So I did, right in front of the growing cedar in the front yard. And for years, nothing happened, except that you got these pretty green leaves, which are often trampled by the paper boy who was very eagerly crossing the lawn. And Glenn built a little fence around it for protection, but still nothing. Then one spring, it happened. 4 beautiful rosy buds opened into 6-inch single scarlet blooms with hearts of pure gold. We were entranced. And that tree peony is still blooming 25 years later. And even though the cedar has grown so close, it touches the peony if I don't prune it back, and that the first rain will destroy the silky petals, it continues to entrance me. The lesson here is that even a budget gardener can plan to choose one special long-lived plant a year. Roses, peonies, lilacs, plants that will give you joy for many years to come. And you know what? You save money in the long run. When you buy a pre-loved home, you inherit many things. At our house, one of these was a cement pad that extended the driveway for an extra vehicle, And I guess it was once useful for housing the car of a teenage driver, but it was now an eyesore leading from the front yard to the back. So I thought, I'll do something about this. We couldn't afford to hire someone to jackhammer it, so I thought I'd build a Zen garden on top of it. We got an inexpensive load of river stone that was dumped on the driveway, and into that, I nestled stepping stones brought back from the Tyndallstone quarries, which then, believe it or not, let you take as many as you like for 20 bucks a truckload. My neighbor Ross Gage and his son Jamie and his wonderful gardening daughter Shannon, who has a story about building a garden in the forest at Kenora on page 114 in this year's Prairie Garden, took me on a morning excursion and we brought back a load of flat-topped stones, enough for both of us. Now, this is one of my favorite places to sit in the shade on a hot summer afternoon where I can gaze at the little garden that I planted on the other side. I added stepping stones leading to the neighbors' yards, and that's my only regret now because the deer love this walkway and use it to access the hydrangeas that I cherish but seldom get to enjoy thanks to them. I should mention that we built both border gardens in the front and the back using the newspaper method, where you trace out the shape of the garden that you want to build, and then you lay down wet newspaper covering with it with several layers of several inches of topsoil. And then, of course, the grass and any weeds that are still there will underneath will die, and along with the newspapers, they'll enrich the planting base. Well, the first time we did that, we didn't soak the paper, and it took about 4 years for it to sort of melt and break down so that the base was actually something you get through for perennials. Nevertheless, this is a time-saving and labor-saving method to build a new garden for anybody who hasn't tried it. And Shauna, my daughter, who has come to Winnipeg, back to Winnipeg from Toronto 2 years ago, and is now the editor and publisher of Canada's Local Garden, tells us in detail on page 120 of the Prairie Garden how she created her vegetable garden last year using just this method. I should say she's a lot more detail-oriented than I am, so you've got actually the amounts of inches and space and all that sort of thing I would never get around to telling you. Another thing that can be very expensive is trees. They can be a really high-cost garden item, and we resolved this in the early days by buying them very young. The giant blue spruce outside my office window now was a sapling that we bought at the Norwood Market for just $7. And its twin tree now towers over the back fence in the yard, in the park out back. And what we learned was that trees planted young take a few years longer to get started, but they catch up in a very short time. And they catch up to that expensive caliper tree that you put out big bucks for. Not only that, but they're healthier and they develop a better root system and they support better future growth. You know, as a younger gardener, I took the time to divide and increase my long-lived perennials. That ensured that they were healthier and bloomed better, and they helped my budget. But because I was busy expanding my plant knowledge over the years, I have bought and tried hundreds of varieties so that I could observe them grow and learn about them firsthand and take photos. But if I had to do it again, I would probably stick to less variety and spend more time increasing the ones that I loved. However, the lesson here is that perennials don't live forever. Many are short-lived and will fade out after just a few years. Exceptions are hosta, peonies, which can live to be, as you know, 80 years or more, oriental poppy, iris, heliopsis, which is false sunflowers, yarrow, perennial salvia, daylilies, and my favorite, phlox. I have a whole garden full of phlox, and that's just a few. Investing in these will save you money over the long term, and most can be divided to increase your garden. And what slide am I on here? Ah, that's it. It's now been 30 years since I started this garden. The once bare and boring lawn is squeezed between plantings of perennials and trees and shrubs. And the poplar has gone, but the cedars have grown to overshadow the house and the front yard. And in the back, a towering ash tree volunteered to embrace the entire yard. I have less sun and more shade, but I have to confess that I really love the quiet shade plants. The little shrubs that I was told would only get so high have defied the odds and grown much larger than planned. They seem determined to shelter my home, whether I like it or not, and you know what, I like it. I can't spend as much time in the garden as I would like because even at my tender age, I'm very busy with a myriad of pursuits, and now time seems to go so fast. So overgrown as it is, there is some comfort in knowing that the plants will take care of themselves, even if I don't have time to intervene. My budget is now spent on filling all those annuals containers that surround the pool. hang from trees, and spill out of the window boxes, creating my own little paradise. Thank you all for listening. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this year's Prairie Garden, and I would like to thank Evelyn and Tim for inviting me to participate once again. Thank you. And now I would like to invite the wonderful Stu Innes to share his thoughts on the many ways to propagate plants. Stu?
Thank you. I'm always interested in budgeting sort of matters in gardening because I have a Scottish background, so it's always dear to my heart. Debbie and I are, like many people, we get a little bit nervous when we do presentations, but I'm always comforted when most of the audience is gardening people because okay, anyone who gardens in this climate has to have a sense of humor and be rather patient and forgiving. And so it's always nice to know that those are the people that are in the audience. So I'm gonna beg your patience a little bit just to diverge for a couple of minutes and say a couple of things. One is that Debbie and I have always read Prairie Garden books. We've been doing it for many years, but we never thought we'd be contributing to them, sort of on the basis of what qualifications do we have to do that. Debbie is a master gardener, I'm not. So I always like to say that she's the master and I'm just the gardener. However, eventually we did each write articles somewhat on behalf of other organizations that were asked to cover certain subjects. And so eventually it kind of sunk in that that is really the premise of the Prairie Garden. It's about gardeners and horticultural people sharing their knowledge and their experience in a very unbiased way. In fact, that's the strength of the magazine, in my opinion. So that's great. I do encourage people, though, that if you find that people are coming to you and asking for advice on certain things, that you probably are the local expert, in other words, and you probably have information that would be valuable to other people. So do consider writing articles and submitting them to the book. Well, one piece of advice I will give you, though, is that I always find that writing the article is the easy part. The challenge is finding good quality photographs to kind of illustrate what you're doing. And I think anyone who's written a book is probably aware of that. So do take the time, if you're even thinking about doing it someday, to take good pictures of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and some of the end results. It's valuable later. Secondly, now I forgot to get my notes out here, but I'll try and go from memory. I always like to list at least one good reference, and in this case on plant propagation, there's a book called The Plant Propagator's Bible. I believe that the author's name is Amanda Smith, and I like that book. Somebody's nodding back there. So I like that book partly because it covers all different forms of propagation very succinctly, not so much maybe what I'm going to talk about, but many forms. And she also provides a good long list of the species that apply to each of those methods. So I found it quite good. And last time I checked, it was available through McNally Robinson. The last thing I want to say is that when Debbie talks, I know she's going to refer to the fact that her grandmother got her interested in gardening in some sense. In my case, it was my grandfather. After he retired, he sort of took up his real interest, which was gardening, and even ended up writing a few small articles regularly for local small papers in that area. But neither of our grandparents would either get to know how much gardening became part of our lives. And so I always encourage people, never underestimate the value of the time you spend with children in a garden. You never know what seed will germinate, right? So let's get on with the subject at hand, which is plant propagation. Now that's kind of an expansive name for what I really ended up talking about, which was 3 different forms of layering. And layering is an old English term that refers to this business of getting roots to grow on part of a plant where there were not any roots before. And so I talk about 3 different forms of it. although different authors in different areas use a different name for the same thing, and they use various different techniques, especially where the climate is different. So I try and cover what's sort of relevant to our climate here. Now, the first form I talk about is ground layering. And I talk about a couple of these because people tend to be confused about what it really means. Ground layering is where you take the stem or a branch of a plant and you wound it in a certain way, and I talk about that in the article. But you must then bend that branch down so that the wounded area is in the ground and the end of the branch is above the ground, in fact, preferably upright. And you try and get roots to form in this way. Now, there's a couple of things about almost any forms of propagation that you should know. One is that you need the plant and the soil not to be moving in comparison to each other, or any new roots will get damaged. The other thing is that almost always the growing media, which is not always soil, the growing media needs to be moist, not dry, not wet, because roots need both air and water to grow. So you need to keep the media moist only. So with ground layering, ultimately you should get some roots forming there above or beyond where the wound is. And then once you have enough roots, you can separate it from the parent plant by cutting the stem further down. And with ground layering, you can either leave the plant growing where it is or pot it up and move it somewhere else. So this form of propagation works really well with things that are generally climbing vines, things like grapes and clematis and wisteria. It works really well with ivies. It's almost, takes no effort, even in a pot in the case of an ivy. You can also do it with some of the outer newer branches of various shrubs. It may work. And it's something that naturally happens with most ground cover plants, right? They send their stems out along the ground, and once some soil washes on them, they send out more roots. So we didn't invent these things, nature did. We just used them for different purposes. Now, there are two other things that sometimes get called ground layering. They're very related. One of them is sometimes called mounding, and that's where you can wound the stem or each stem of a bush or shrub, and then mound a bunch of soil over top of that area. And eventually, perhaps in a year, maybe more, you should end up with roots on each stem of that plant. Now, it tends to be something that's done more on a commercial basis because they're trying to create many, many plants in that case. But there is another form where you're also wounding, say, the main stem of a plant or the trunk of a tree up above the ground, and you're trying to get another layer of roots to grow. Now, we do that sometimes with bonsai, where the trunk of the tree is too long and we want to shorten it up. So we wound the stem above the ground, plant the tree deeper or raise the soil level up and get it to grow a new layer of roots. And then later on, we cut off the whole bottom of the tree so that it's now a shorter tree. Now, you probably wouldn't be doing that very often with plants or with trees. It's something that naturally happens with trees like cedars and larches in a bog or a swamp as the water level rises over the years. It's also something, though, that we do when we hill up a row of corn or plant a new tomato deep in the ground. We're looking for the plant to create another layer of roots further up. In the case of corn, it helps stabilize it. In the case of a tomato, it gives it a bigger root system so that it doesn't dry out so easily. So these are different forms of ground layering. Now, there's another thing called air layering that often confuses people. It's not that we're growing roots in air. It's that the whole process is taking place up above the ground, up in the air, so to speak. That's where the name comes from. And in this case, it's one of the more complicated methods of layering. So it would really require a whole different article and discussion. But essentially, again, you're wounding a branch or a stem, and now you have to put some growing media of some kind around that area for the roots to grow into. So sometimes it's only sphagnum moss. In the case of this picture, they're actually using paper towels, which I found rather interesting. But you have to hold that in place. So they often wrap the area with plastic wrap or tie bags, plastic bags around. There are some commercial containers that snap around the stem. And I've used various drink bottles and pots cut in half and all sorts of things to suit the geometry. But eventually you should get roots forming around that area. And then you can simply again cut below the wound and pot this plant up. Generally, you won't have too many roots right off the bat, so you'll have to look after the plant very carefully until the roots develop further. So that's something you may not do, but I think it's good to understand what the term air layering means. So a couple examples here. On the left is a bald cypress that I needed to cut the top of, but they're a rare species to get here, so I didn't just want to throw it away, so I was air layering the top of the tree to create another plant. And I was doing the same thing with the ficus or fig here. And they're very easy to root, so you can see on the right side sort of what it looks like after you cut the top of the tree off. And in this case, ficus root very easily, so there's a pretty good root system there. So we do that again in bonsai quite often. However, by far the most common form of layering is what some people call rooting cuttings or taking slips of plants. And this, of course, is a more popular thing for most home gardeners. This is where you take typically the end off a stem of a plant, and you put the cut end in some growing media again and hope to get some roots to form. Typically, we're doing a lot of cuttings at one time when we're doing it, so we put them in a little larger growing container. People who do this commercially are usually making fairly small cuttings, maybe only a couple inches in height, because they want to make as many plants from one as possible. And they want to use as little nursery or greenhouse space in the winter as possible at first. Home gardeners tend to root much bigger pieces of plants when they're doing it, because we want to end up with a bigger plant right off the bat. So one of the things, though, that I find is not covered well and explained well when people try to do cuttings is the importance of focusing on where the roots are going to grow, which is usually a node in the plant. Now, a node is anywhere that you have or have had a leaf or a stem. And usually on plants like a coleus, there's kind of a ridge around where there's a node. It's an obvious place. On other plants, there might just be sort of a scar where there used to be a leaf. But that's where you're most likely to get roots forming. So that's where you should focus. And by that, I mean we normally make the cut below a node, and then we put the plant in the growing media so that the node is about halfway down, because the top dries out, the bottom's too wet, the nice continuously moist areas in the middle. When you're applying root hormone, if you're doing that, you don't always need it. Again, focus on putting it around that node, not on the cut end of the stem, which is what most people do. So just a couple of points that might help out. In this case, what I had was a couple of coleus stems that were rather long, and one of them had a long section with no nodes on it. So just as an experiment, I stuck them in a tall container. And you can see that the only place that the roots formed was where there were nodes. And this one long stretch that had no nodes on it, there was no roots there. So it just emphasizes that. Now, most deciduous and broadleaf plants, if you're doing cuttings, you're going to need a humidity tent of some kind. In other words, you might just put plastic food wrap over top, but a lot of commercial containers have sort of a clear plastic dome that goes over the plants, just to keep the humidity up. Because they have no roots, you have to keep them hydrated somehow, so they need high humidity. On the other hand, with drought-tolerant plants, especially fleshy ones like geranium, you do a couple of things different. If you put a humidity tent over a geranium, it will probably be rotting inside of 2 days. They need drier air. And the same holds true, of course, for succulents or cacti or anything like that. The other thing is that when you cut them, you have to let that cut end dry out before you put them into the growing media. And that's something people don't always think about. With a succulent, it might take a week for that end to dry out. With a geranium, it might take 2 or 3 days. So it's okay to spray the foliage in the meantime to keep them hydrated, keep them out of the sun so they don't dry out, but let that cut end dry before you do put it in the growing chamber. So now, I'm testing my memory here a little bit. I can't read the words there, so I'm going to have to look at the slides occasionally. Coleus is an easy thing to root. Almost any form of ivy or vine is relatively easy to root as an example. The ficus or fig is also quite easy to root. I've rooted branches that were 1.5 inches across, generally for bonsai purposes, however. But it just shows that you can make fairly large cuttings, or you can make very small cuttings. This is a tiny bit of azalea that I rooted in, I think it was pure pumice in this case. So why do we do these things? Why do we layer? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that you're making an exact clone of the original plant. So you'll get exactly the same flowers, the same foliage, and so on, which is not always the case, for instance, with growing seeds. So you're making a clone of the plant, unless, of course, the original plant was grafted onto a different rootstock, where you might get a different result. Also, you can make many different plants from one, generally doing it this way. One of the things that I ran into, and where I started with this whole learning about all of these things, was we would get in unique plants for bonsai or for gardening. And if that plant died, you had nothing, and you might not be able to get another one. So for insurance purposes, we propagate them so that if one died, we always had something else to keep going. So with ground layering, it's easy to extend a row of, say, grapes or something like that. You just ground layer one branch on the end of the row, and then you just let it grow there, and you've extended the row. One of the other things about both ground layering and air layering is that you can make a much bigger plant. You can root a much bigger branch, in other words. Whereas with cuttings, it works best with a small piece of the plant. And that's part of the secret with different species, is knowing how big or how young or how old a piece of branch is easy to root. You can make many from one. Where we use it quite often, other than I use it for bonsai, but we use it a lot for gardening, where we've got plants that would be perennials if they were in the tropic, but we use them as annuals. And so you can dig up one in the fall, put it in a pot, keep it in your house, and then late winter, early spring, you make a bunch of cuttings of it to set back out in the garden. Or I actually very often take 1 or 2 cuttings in the fall and grow those through the winter, and then use those to propagate again later in the year. One of the things I find is that cuttings quite often make a more balanced looking and a more vigorous plant than the original plant that I might have potted up and then set back outside, and there's some reasons for that. It's also generally a faster way of propagating things, getting a bigger plant than, say, starting from seed. So in this case, it's just another example of air layering something. In the top picture, the branch on the right was air layered off the rest of the plant that's there. And a few years later, it's in a bonsai pot. It hasn't been styled yet, but it's on its way to being a bonsai, rather than just throwing out, in this case, a juniper that's hard to get in our location. Another reason that I use cuttings for is when we have a bonsai show, we show little plants underneath that sort of add the sense of a landscape underneath the bonsai tree. And I've gotten into growing a lot of those, we call them companion plants. And so it's sometimes hard to get a plant small enough to go in these little pots. So I show an example there where I took the end off of Bacopa last spring because I wanted a white flower. And before the thing, well, it was only about 1.5 inches high, and before it even had many roots, it was already blooming again. And so I put it in with a black mondo grass in this little black and white pot, and it looked quite nice. There's also a lantana there that I've had in a small container for about 6 years now. It started out in a container about half that size. As long as it's getting enough light, it's blooming. So these are a couple of rare plants. There's a miniature rose there that has a flower color that I've not seen again on a miniature rose. And so I made cuttings of it, and we have several roses now. Hopefully at least one of them always survives. And a little Satsuki azalea that they have multicolored flowers, both grown from cuttings. These are just typical plants that you might make cuttings of and put out in the spring. Lantana, coleus. I have a computer room in a corner of the basement that would be a rather dim little area if I didn't have a 4-layer light stand down there. So this is just one end of one of the shelves last winter. And I counted 7 plants in there that were grown from cuttings, 2 from divisions, and 2 little begonias that just decided to seed themselves. We have no idea how that happened, but all those plants were in our garden this summer. And I'll leave you with this picture. Our bonsai club has a holiday photo contest where we dress up a bonsai with miniature lights and decorations and take a picture of it. And the winner gets, well, bragging rights for the year, but that's about all. But the 3 main trees on there that are real growing on that rock were Hinoki cypress cuttings. And so this is just to show you that you can use these methods to propagate plants for many different reasons and plants of many different kinds. So I always like to leave the last words for my wife, so I'll ask Debbie to come up now. I would give you a better introduction to her, but I left my notes out back. She is a master gardener, and she's one of the most knowledgeable people I know on germinating seeds, and now she's into saving them and working a lot with native plants as well. And like myself, she's very much self-taught. And we've had a few years experience to go on now. In fact, recently we celebrated our 50th anniversary. So it just goes to show that as a gardener, she's not only patient and forgiving in the garden, but she is in all senses.
Thank you, Stu. That's a pretty good introduction. Well, I am not really that great in front of microphones, so I'll do my best. But I do love my plants, my seeds, and growing, and that will hopefully give me the impetus to tell you a lot of stuff today. Okay, so to start with, the article is called A Seed Saving Story. And I did make mention of my grandmother, my mother's mother, who we live 30 miles away from. So I saw her a lot as a kid growing up. And she was garden mentor for sure. She had gone to the University of Guelph. She grew up West Montrose, Ontario, which is a stone's throw from that university. And she took horticulture and art. And she did both extremely well. And I try to emulate both in some way. I'm still no good at art, but I got a few tricks when it comes to gardening. So anyway, I just want to share a picture. I don't know if you can see this. This was my grandmother. She was a tall lady. I think she was about 5'11", and her feet were big too. I think those were size 11 as well, and I didn't inherit any of those characteristics. But so I don't know, she's pictured here. I found this on the family site yesterday, and I was surprised to find this picture actually, because lily is the favorite flower of mine, and here she is with a beautiful, gorgeous, tall lily, and it's white. And my husband says I always grow white everything, but it's just because I have this variety of lily that is a crazy spreader, and it just goes everywhere. But this summer I grew a fair amount of white because I was trying to grow some flowers for a wedding. And I was growing blue, and most of those didn't pan out. But anyway, I do have some seed from those things. Anyway, that was her. And okay, looking for my slides, and there they are. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see that. But anyway, there's just some seed samples. It's on the far. Oh, yeah, a zinnia seed head. I've been asked, like, where do you find the seed and when do you harvest? And well, it's different for every flower, of course. The zinnias are all kind of layered, and there's a lot of chaff, but the seed is there too. And I have a better picture coming up, so we'll go on. Oh, that's just milkweed seed, and I collected a lot this year. And this is my seed saving special sharing of seeds and packaging that I do. I have so many seeds, I've just gotten out of control. I cannot stop myself. I just save seeds everywhere I go. And I actually have access to a lot of gardens within my neighborhood because we started a neighborhood park, and there's all kinds of native plants there, grasses. More about that later as well. But I brought some seeds, and they're done up in these little packages, and when you take it apart, you can figure out just how I did that. I find it the best way to do that because the seeds are contained inside the package. I don't have to tape or staple or anything else if you do it right. So it's a bit of a puzzle for you. Anyway, after the presentation, you're welcome to come up and help yourself to at least one package of seed. There's everything from annuals to native wildflowers. I don't have grasses this year. I gave them all away, and I didn't collect any more. There's a real variety, however, lots of flowers, and I love flowers. Okay, this is I have seed for this. My friend, who is a florist, gave me this seed, and it is across, well, I guess it's a cultivar of Queen Anne's lace. And it doesn't look a lot like it and doesn't grow as tall, but it's kind of a neat plant. And I guess I should say that I do a lot of flower arranging, and I'm currently coordinating and teaching classes with St. Vital Ag Society. We have a class coming up on Wednesday. So there'll be more about that later too. Okay, this is one of my seeds, plants that I'm growing and saving seed from every year. It's called Scabiosa, it's an annual. And because I was doing this wedding, I was trying to gather blue flowers. And this is considered blue in the plant world. However, you'll find that blue is not blue always, not in my view anyway, it's lavender. So I wasn't super happy with that. Morning Glories is, I saved seed from that and grow, well, I don't start though, I mean, these come up every year, and that's the thing about Morning Glories. If you get them in a warm, sunny spot, let them go to seed, you'll have them every year. So it's pretty easy. The first year, however, when I was trying to get them started, I had a number of false starts, and they didn't get mature enough to produce seed. And so the first year then I started them in the house, got them going, put them out. And then I had seed that year and I had them continuously after that. The only thing with them now is that the pink ones are overriding the blue ones that were growing at the same time. So we had to select out a few blue and we'll try and get those going this coming year, because the blue are very beautiful as well. This was a new plant for me. It's an African flower called Vanidian, and I grew it from seed. It's kind of sunflower-like, and it was a good performer, produced a lot of bloom, but I did not get the seed from it. It did not mature enough to get seed. So your plants have to get old enough and completely mature for the seed to start developing. So that's one of the things you become aware of as you try to save seed. This is a zinnia I grew from seed from a flower company called Stems in Ontario, and they grow flowers, a lot of flowers for florist use. So that's kind of my interest in some of my selections, not all. And that is the dried flower zinnia head. And it's really quite difficult to separate the chaff from the seed, but it generally forms around the base of the flower. And there, okay, hard to see. Yeah, if you look really close, you'll be able to see the difference. The seed is a different color, usually brown. Those ones look almost greenish if you look close. Marigolds. I always save marigolds every year. And this year, the variety I grew was something that did not mature enough, so I did not get marigold seed. However, I have a reserve. I have some marigold seed from previous years and usually keeps over. So I'll be all right. I may not be this variety, but something anyway. And the white wedding aster. Now, this one came from revival seed. And I haven't said to this point that when saving seed, you need to save from open pollinated heritage or heirloom plants. So this is an older variety. The whole company of Revival is the older seed varieties. So I tried a few things from there, and I ordered a yellow lupin. I thought, well, I was trying to grow some yellow as well. And I planted it too early and it got so big, it was hitting my lights and I had to abandon it. So it's fantastic. It grew so well, so easily. And lupins can be challenging because the seed is hard as a rock and you can't break the dormancy in it. So I think what I did with that one is soaked the seed in warm water till it, like overnight, and even beyond that sometimes, to break that dormancy of lupin seed. The other thing you can do with lupin seed is simply plant it outside or freeze it, I think. And you can break the seed, hard shell, and get it to germinate. So anyway, it was an epic fail as far as getting blooms, but I learned something about getting those seeds to go. Anyway. Okay, so I pretty much every year grow some sort of snapdragon. I have a few packages of seed for that, and these are also from stems, so they're a tall variety. So I decided I was going to make a basket for the agricultural fair out of snapdragons, because the thing with snapdragons is they kind of have a season, they bloom on schedule, but it's not always my schedule. So they miss the mark so many times, it's crazy. But this year I had an abundance at the right time. It's kind of an epic thing. So I made use of it and actually won a red ribbon. Okay, so back to the thing about the wedding. Yeah, I was growing some plants for my nephew's wedding, which was August 17th, I think. The perfect time to have some flowers from the garden. So anyway, they decided to go with silk flowers. And then, okay, what do I do with that? That's not where I started out from. So, this is the bouquet that I ended up with making for the bride. And it has, okay, so artificial silk flowers can look pretty lifeless if they don't have something that was previously alive or something. So I grew nigella pods, white statice, and we have this bush out front called Euonymus that I dried some of that just on the off chance that it would work. And I had lavender larkspur growing in the garden that came up on its own. And that crazy lavender turned out to be the exact right blue for the wedding bouquet. And it had long stems. So that's what I put together for the wedding bouquet. There's more to the story though, because I had seen this video on YouTube for the armature made out of willow. So I actually did that to create the bouquet. So it's a matter of bending curly willow into sort of this cage central holder thing. And so I built my bouquet on this willow holder. So it was quite a piece of artwork. And this is one of the main wedding pictures of the group. I did the other girls' bouquets. I did some other silk arrangements. Okay, we're gonna skip over. There's an arrangement with some marigolds for the flower arranging group. Yeah, that's more. And Gloriosa Daisy is a favorite of mine. What a great flower that is. Once it starts blooming, it just keeps on going. Very frost hardy too. It's probably still blooming, as are the snapdragons. I still have snapdragons that are alive. So I like it for that reason as well. And this is how to get the milkweed seed without the fluff. So I just open the pod carefully, grab the fluff between my fingers and pinch it and then flick the seed off. And it works very well. Oh, this is what not to plant. Does anyone know what this is? Tropical milkweed, yes. So I made the mistake of accepting some milkweed from a neighbor, and it turned out, she said, oh, it's the perennial one. So I thought, okay, this is the one I want. But it turned out to be tropical, which is not a good thing to plant. It has some bacteria. It promotes the bacteria and it makes the monarchs think that they have a food source and they don't migrate when they should. So if you want to know more about that, just go online and what was it, site on what's wrong with the tropical milkweed. This is the tallgrass prairie planting. This is the Tweedia, another milkweed, the blue flower, goldenrod from the tallgrass prairie, and Rebecca lanceolata. It's become one of my favorite native plants. It's beautiful, looks like a chrysanthemum. This is Upland's white aster, and kind of an unusual plant, I think native to Ontario or something. It's a yellow foxglove, and it's hardy here, no problem. So I saved the seed for that. I didn't bring any today, but I'm hoping to propagate that. It's a great plant. And this is meadow blazing star with the monarch, native of course. And I love this plant. It grows quite tall. And the monarchs come in pairs and kind of dance around it, which is really cool to see. So grab a package and give it a go. Okay, this is one of the pictures of the tall grass prairie. This was planted in 2021 in the heat of the summer. It was great fun out there, sweating and carrying loads of dirt and stuff up the hill. We put down cardboard and layered on 10 inches of soil and seeded. And within a few weeks, we had a rain and the whole thing was coming up glorious. I actually did an article about this in Prairie Garden a couple years ago. Anyway, it was great fun. And it turned out phenomenal. It's become one of my favorite gardens in the park. Okay, back to the vegetables. So this is an heirloom bean called purple peacock. Grows in our garden. We've cut it back now to about a 10-foot row because it is so productive. It produces enough in a summer to feed the two of us for a whole year. So I highly recommend it. It is a pole bean. You have to put some tall supports for it, but it's a great plant. And there's on the cookie sheet for freezing, there it is on the vine. And it grows about, I would say, 8 feet. So you've got to put some really tall supports. But it just never stops, just keeps going and going. This is another heritage plant called Orac. It's the purple variety. And it frost hardy, grows very beautifully and grows tall. But in the early spring, I harvest it for greens and love it. I'm going to try the green variety. I think it's a different taste. And there it is, ready to go into the freezer. And okay, so the carrot is here to remind me to tell you that carrots are biennial, and it's a little more of a process to save the seed from a carrot. So one year we had one that continued to grow. It stayed in the garden and grew and produced seed all on its own. And I saved that seed and planted it. I didn't find there was any issues with it. So it's easy-ish. It's something you can do if you're dedicated, but there's lots of varieties and things that you might want to have the large carrots or the small ones or whatever. Anyway, so I did some pickling, I preserve, and that's one of the economy things I do as well. Save food, put some stuff up for winter, and pretty much fill the freezer every summer. This is a little pumpkin that I got. Actually got the plants at the Master Gardening plant sale, and this is how I save the seed. I take everything and put it in a sieve and run water through it, take the beds out, and then it goes into a cookie sheet to dry somewhere. These again are kind of what not to grow if you want a good eating pumpkin. It's jack-o'-lanterns. So for a good eating pumpkin, there's special varieties, and I've grown a lot of them, and I mentioned it in the article. I think Queensland Blue, Gelo Ezine, ugly, very ugly, but a great pumpkin. So yeah, and I think a lot of people make that mistake in the beginning. They will try to grow these, and it's not good eating. Okay, there's the fermenting of the tomato seed. I have a sample here. The seed comes from a tomato with a gel, enclosed in a gel. You have to break that down. in order for it to germinate the next year. So this is the process. It's recommended, and it also helps prevent disease. Apparently, I don't know. This is it. My tomato seeds on a paper plate drying. And this is it to make sauce. I did this trial on different varieties. There's Sunset Bumblebee, Yellow Pear, old variety, and a new one by a hybridizer in California, Blue and Gold. And I'm going to edit that one. I don't like, it's a little too tart for me. And oh, this is what can happen with some varieties. I had that with one I grew this year that is a heritage. And I had an Amish paste tomato that was 16.6 ounces. And so that's my go-to tomato. There it is on the scale. So yeah, it's just an amazing tomato flavor. The skin comes off. It's not overly seedy. Just a beautiful tomato. The other one that I grow is Berkeley tie-dye, and I have that in the jar over here. And so I highly recommend that. So that concludes my discussion on seeds and varieties and so on. So I'll turn it back over to Daniel or Tim.
That concludes our launch, and hope you purchased the book. Don't forget to go to the main page of our prairiegarden.ca website. Submit your feedback. We would love to hear about your feedback, and possibly, hopefully, you'll win one of the 3 books that you may not have received. Thank you very much.
Sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify that there are lots of seeds out there to be had. There are also 5 plants grown from cuttings. First come, first served.
And thank you all again to today's presenters and to all of you for joining us here and online. Due to the sheer number of contributors, there will be no formal signing today, but you are welcome to approach any of the contributors if you'd like one of them to sign your book. Copies are available here in the atrium to my left by the tree on the table. And just make sure to bring them to the cash desk before you leave the store, just to make sure that they're paid for. There are some additional copies at the cash desk as well. And thank you once again to the Prairie Garden Committee, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.